The subcommittee will come to order. We really want to get to you guys' testimony. So with that being said, I ask that my statement be entered into the record. This is so important that we talk about our shipbuilding industrial base and getting holes in the water. So with that, I'm going to yield to my good friend, Ranking Member Courtney, for any statement he may have.
Sure. Thank you, Chairman Kelly. Actually, the crowd that's here speaks volumes more powerfully in some ways than any remarks that we can make. So, I mean, this is actually really special for us who have been working on these issues for the years to see the fact that, you know, this topic now has become suddenly, you know, a hot topic. So anyway, with that, I also will enter my statement for the record and thank the witnesses for being here.
I now recognize the chairman of the Coast Guard and Maritime Transportation Subcommittee, Mr. Ezell, from my home state of Mississippi, for any opening remarks he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to submit my opening statement for the record.
Thank you, Mr. Ezell. I now recognize the Coast Guard and Maritime Transportation Subcommittee Ranking Member Mr. Carbajal, who is a close friend, for any opening remarks that he might have.
Thank you, Chairman Kelly. I, too, will submit my opening statement for the record, and I appreciate everybody who's here. I think there's a lot to discuss, so looking forward to it.
And all you people in the back, I suggest you read our statements. We put a lot of thought and time in this, but we want to hear from the people in the industry who matter. But our statements do matter, and it shows how passionate each of the four sitting up here are on that subject. With that, I now recognize our witnesses for any opening statements they would like to make. Their testimony has been submitted for the record, so we ask that you stick to 5 minutes for your mark. We have Mr. Jason Potter is performing the duties of Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Research, Development, and Acquisition. Mr. Potter, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Kelly, Ranking Member Courtney, Chairman Ezell, Ranking Member Carbajal, and distinguished members of the committees. Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to report on the state of our nation's Navy shipbuilding enterprise. It's an honor to represent the Department of the Navy and the hundreds of thousands of dedicated service members and civilians who constitute our nation's naval strength. The United States Navy remains the world's preeminent naval force. The skill and dedication of our sailors and Marines are unmatched, and the capabilities of our warships are second to none. However, we must be candid about the challenges we face. We are operating in the most complex security environment in generations, an era of persistent competition where threats rapidly evolve and rivals test our resolve daily. Our adversaries are subsidizing shipbuilding and delivering hulls at an ever-increasing pace. Meanwhile, America's shipbuilding industrial base has contracted through a lack of strategic focus and investment, strangled by both poor corporate management and problematic government acquisition processes. The administration's Golden Fleet Initiative is the strategic approach to address these issues and deliver the fleet of the future. It consists of 3 tenets. First, maintain and enhance maritime dominance. We are expanding the ways the naval service will ensure victory over any enemy, anytime, and any place. The Navy is preparing to meet any foe up and down the spectrum of competition and conflict with a high-low mix of capabilities. That requires us to invest in current and new classes of combat ships and new capabilities such as unmanned systems, and to recapitalize our auxiliary fleet. Second, revitalize the industrial base. We're revitalizing shipyards across America with tens of billions of dollars in stable, predictable, long-term investments to get more ships in the water, bolstering high-skill, high-wage American jobs. We're improving production of established ship classes through distributed shipbuilding. By prioritizing auxiliary ships, we will both meet the needs of the fleet and regenerate capacity for commercially viable shipbuilding. Third, change how we do business. We are moving Navy shipbuilding from a compliance-based bureaucracy to an outcome-focused warfighting enterprise, restoring accountability, rewarding performance, and embracing advanced technology to deliver capability at speed by enforcing discipline, leveraging distributed production, and enabling stable, repeatable workload. This budget requests $65.8 billion in shipbuilding funding for 18 Battle Force ships and 16 non-Battle Force ships. As waters around the world become increasingly contested, it is imperative that the United States efficiently deliver the naval vessels it requires to enable maritime domain awareness and deterrence. The budget request enables the Golden Fleet Initiative, including initial funding for next-generation battleships and frigates, as well as increases the capacity of public shipyards and improves overall ship readiness. The budget will maintain or increase the procurement of most existing battle force platforms, including amphibious vessels and Columbia-class and Virginia-class submarines. The budget also begins the long overdue recapitalization of strategic sea lift vessels, hospital vessels, consolidated cargo replenishment tankers, submarine tenders, and other vessels vital for logistics. This administration is committed to building a more lethal and ready naval force, and the Secretary of the Navy is taking decisive action. We are supporting distributed shipbuilding efforts around the country and deploying innovative contract structures to better balance the downside risk and upside opportunity for the government. We're holding ourselves and our contractors accountable, canceling or restructuring programs that we're not delivering, too expensive, or too slow. We're initiating programs that will better meet warfighting and operational requirements faster. We've implemented the Congress's direction for portfolio acquisition executives, including maritime and robotic and autonomous systems, to streamline acquisition and more rapidly deliver capability to the fleet. The challenges ahead are real, but so are the opportunities. This budget request sets us on a path to rebuild our industrial capacity, a long-term effort that requires a sustained whole-of-nation commitment. The Department of the Navy is fully committed to this mission. We ask for your continued support, including the stable, predictable authorities and funding that will deliver the fleet our nation needs. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Potter. The Honorable Stephen Carmel is the Administrator of the U.S. Maritime Administration. Administrator Carmel, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, Chairman Kelly, Ranking Member Courtney, Chairman Ezell, Ranking Member Carbajal, and members of the subcommittees. The challenges our maritime industry have are often reduced to one of cost, but that is a gross oversimplification. The United States does not simply have a maritime cost problem, we have a maritime capability problem, and that capability problem is the product of system design, but not one of strategic intent, but rather designed by neglect, reaction, repeat the process until now. For too long, we have treated maritime policy as the management of separate assets and separate programs, a ship here, a yard there, workforce initiative somewhere else. But maritime power does not work that way. It is not built from ships outward. It is built from cargo inward. The logic is simple. Cargo determines trade flows determine fleets, fleets determine shipbuilding. This is the identity that underpins all successful maritime systems. Any proposed program that starts with building ships, unless intended for pure government use, violates this identity and will fail. If we want ships, we need cargo. If we want shipyards, we need fleets. And if we want enduring maritime capability, we need a system that produces all three. And that's where we've gone wrong. For decades, we have focused on preserving pieces of the maritime base while leaving the underlying structure of demand largely untouched. We have tried to sustain fleets without enough cargo, shipyards without predictable throughput, and readiness without a system designed to generate it. The result is not a coherent maritime system. It is a collection of individual stovepipes operating in a common environment, lacking any coordinating strategy, often operating at war with each other. One part of the system is optimized for lowest cost transportation. Another is trying to preserve surge readiness. Official policy is cargo preference applies, but agency practice does not follow policy, and enforcement mechanisms with real teeth are absent. There is constant tension between the imperative for a robust and resilient maritime sector and the motivation for lowest cost transportation in individual agencies. Each is making rational local decisions, but taken together, they do not produce national capability, they undermine it. While our competitors have treated maritime as a system, they understood that if you structure cargo, fleets follow. If fleets follow, shipbuilding follows. That is how maritime power is built. In looking for a sustainable maritime policy, the impression is the maritime industry is asking for something new. But in fact, we already use public policy to sustain critical industries when market outcomes alone do not protect national interests. We do it in agriculture, we do it in energy, we do it in steel, and we do it in autos, for example. We do it because strategic sectors do not always survive hostile international competition on uneven or biased commercial terms alone. Maritime is no different. A maritime policy that mirrored the outcomes produced by current agricultural policy, for example, could go a long way towards solving our dilemma. Maritime is a critical industry. It underpins trade, supply chain resilience, industrial capacity, and national defense, and it operates in an international environment that is often hostile to American interests. We are not reinventing the wheel. It already exists, and it is in use. We just start putting it on a different axle. That is why the Maritime Action Plan matters. It gets the diagnosis right. It recognizes that shipbuilding, workforce, industrial resilience, and national security are not separate issues. They are parts of a single strategic problem and must be addressed as parts of a single strategic system and must receive support as a system. But a plan alone is not enough. We cannot continue operating inside a structure designed to reward short-term cheapness while expecting it to produce long-term capability. If we want a different outcome, we have to change the structure, both internally and in the international environment. We cannot out-China the Chinese competing in a system they have bent to their advantage. We need to alter the terms of competition, and that means beginning where maritime strength begins, cargo. It means using public policy to create the conditions for predictable demand, fleet formation, shipyard investment, and workforce continuity. It means recognizing China is not a monolithic entity destined for dominance. There are real disadvantages in the Chinese system that our advantages can exploit. It means recognizing giving maritime the kind of structural support we already provide other critical industries is not extraordinary, it is necessary, and it means treating maritime not as a residual sector to be managed in decline, but as a strategic capability that must be intentionally built. The question before us is not whether we can afford to act, it is whether we can afford to continue with a system that produces diligence, dependence, fragility, and erosion while calling it efficiency. Thank you.
Thank you, Administrator. I now recognize Rear Admiral Mike E. Campbell, and he's Director of Systems Integration and Chief Acquisitions Officer for the United States Coast Guard. Admiral Campbell, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Chairman Kelly, Chairman Ezell, Ranking Member Courtney, Ranking Member Carbajal, and distinguished members of the subcommittees. My written testimony has been provided to the committee, and I request to have it entered into the official hearing record. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today to discuss the Coast Guard's role in restoring American shipbuilding. Demand for the Coast Guard has never been higher, and we are moving at speed to meet national priorities and address emerging mission requirements. Under the leadership of President Trump and Secretary Mullen, with the support of Congress and the historic investments made by the Working Families Tax Cut Act, the Coast Guard is focused on building and acquiring the right assets, the right systems, and the right infrastructure to support our people and meet mission demands in this era of competition. Our service is in the midst of the largest shipbuilding effort in our history. We are leveraging the collective capability of the maritime industrial base and select partners to design and deliver polar security cutters, Arctic security cutters, offshore patrol cutters, fast response cutters, waterways commerce cutters, homeland security cutter domestic icebreakers, and several boat classes to provide modern capabilities to meet the demands of our varied operating environment. Shipbuilding is complex and requires substantial investment. Together with the Navy and the Maritime Administration, we are pursuing the vision set forth in America's Maritime Action Plan and executing on Congress's historic investment in our fleet. I will also note our long history of cooperation with the Government Accountability Office and its review of our acquisition programs. And while at times we may disagree on some of the finer points, we appreciate and benefit from the oversight that GAO provides, and those benefits are passed on to the people that we serve. The Coast Guard recognizes the need for some change to improve our acquisitions. Over the last year, in coordination with the Department of Homeland Security, we reorganized our acquisition approach by streamlining governing processes and consolidating decision points. Additionally, the Working Families Tax Cut Act provides the service with flexibility to tailor acquisition requirements for individual programs across our diverse portfolio and execute strategies that deliver the highest return on investment. This allows the Coast Guard to engage industry faster as we modernize our fleet at speed and scale. The Coast Guard is also investing in our organic sustainment capabilities at the Coast Guard Yard in Baltimore, Maryland. The Coast Guard Yard is a critical piece of the nation's overall ship repair capacity and one of its more cost-effective and agile resources. Our shipyard will only grow more important with the construction of new piers and the addition of a floating dry dock capable of lifting our national security cutters and offshore patrol cutters. Every day, the men and women of the Coast Guard answer the call for service to the American people. We save lives. We control, secure, and defend U.S. borders and maritime approaches. We facilitate the safe flow of commerce, and we respond to crises and contingencies. We offer tremendous value for the American people and are determined to maintain this outstanding return on investment. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. I look forward to any questions you may have.
With that, we'll get to question. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record statements of support from the industry and maritime stakeholders. Without objection, so ordered. I now limit myself to 5 minutes. I first want to thank Mr. Garamendi, Mr. Norcross for being here also, Chairman Whitman and Chairman Bergman. They are, you see by the number of chairmen, subcommittee chairmen, and from each of these committees how important this topic is. And I think, but I want to start by a quote from my friend Chairman Whitman, who says, "Quantity is a quality all of itself." Now, you may have stole that, but I'm giving you credit. Administrator Carmel, how is the Maritime Administration currently implementing the Maritime Action Plan, and what changes are needed through the SHIPS Act to bring about growth in both commercial fleets and assured access stipend-supported fleets?
Thank you, sir. There are, of course, two prongs here. One is developing the legislative proposals that are required to implement the various portions of the map. We have done that, and hopefully we'll be sending those up to you in the near future. So we have that part, but we're not waiting for that. We have undertaken a bunch of things that we can do on our own. We don't need legislative action for. In workforce development, for instance, we are working with the unions on dealing with high school level kids. I was just up in Alaska and did a tour of a great training facility up there. They could use some help in terms of innovation. And implementing the map requires new ideas to begin with, so we are working diligently on new ideas that will hopefully give us advantage. As I mentioned in my statement, we're not going to out-China the Chinese, and so we need to reset the terms of competition. Things like ice-class cable layers, for instance, are something I'm paying particular attention to. I think the first transpolar route that will open is actually a subsurface one. Then we have new propulsion technologies. We are looking seriously at things like small nuclear reactors and changing the way we go about marine propulsion in a way that advantages the United States. Regulatory reform is a big one. We are looking internally at things we can do on our own to streamline the PIDP application process, the Title 11 process, to make it easier and more user-friendly. Those are both, right at the moment, extraordinarily onerous processes. We are meeting with representatives of the finance industry to look for new and innovative ways to provide for ship financing. So we are basically already stepping out on things that we can do without legislative intent, and you have a whole slug of proposals coming your way.
Thank you, Administrator. Mr. Potter, we often focus on building new ships, but getting ships through maintenance and back into service on time is just as critical to readiness, especially given today's maritime operational tempo. To what extent is repair capacity, dry dock, skilled labor, and yard availability a limiting factor today, and how can policies like those proposed in the SHIPS Act help expand that capacity as part of the strengthening the maritime industrial base?
Chairman, there's no question the maintenance of our ships and keeping our ships at sea is a critical element of naval power and something we watch very closely. We like to keep all the dry docks full, and even then, there's not enough to go around for our maintenance needs. So absolutely vital, having a vibrant commercial shipbuilding and ship repair industry will support the Navy in our needs and vice versa. And so it's something we work closely with Merit on, and there's cases where when a dry dock is empty, we're coordinating between the agencies with the Hill. Often you may hear about it first, and we will swarm to do what we can there.
Thank you, and in the interest of time, I now recognize my friend and ranking member, Joe Courtney.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. So, Mr. Potter, we had a good conversation actually over the many months about revitalizing the shipbuilding industrial base. Your colleague, Michael Duffy, the Undersecretary for Acquisition and Sustainment, was before the full committee, HASC committee, a few weeks ago. And, the one message that he conveyed was that if we really want to stimulate, investment, hiring, and, strong production cadence, multi-year procurement is really the key sort of incentive for, again, stimulating the industry. And would you agree with that assessment?
Yes. Yes, Congressman.
So in 2023, we passed the NDAA, the FY24 NDAA, which provided a multi-year procurement for the Virginia-class program, which you referred to in your opening remarks, again, which will authorize up to 13 Virginia-class submarines, which, again, subject to negotiation. Again, we're now, well into the third year since the authorities were granted. We're still waiting to get that, and again, being pretty close to that industrial base. There's no question that in terms of supply chain companies, that really is kind of the Da Vinci Code in terms of, how you really stimulate people to sort of jump into the game when they see a long horizon of a multi-year contract. Can you tell us where that process stands?
Yeah, Congressman, Jan, the multi-year contracts, for sure, they're typically for shipbuilding 5-year contracts, 10 ships if it's 2 per year, sometimes more, sometimes less. And that provides a binding commitment from the government to a contractor on that we will commit to those ships, and if we don't, there's termination liability penalties. And so it's a extraordinary multi-year commitment that, subject to appropriations, we're able to enter into. That does allow these companies to then enter into subcontracts for multiple ship sets of components, 10, engines and so forth. And there's economies of scale that come. The government typically gets at 8 to 10% savings over annual procurements, as you know. So in this case, the next Virginia-class contract, Block 6, has been coupled with the next Columbia-class contract, Build 2, as you're well aware. And total, that's 15 submarines. And so there's been a little bit of a longer-term negotiation as the complexity of that negotiation has increased. But there's no question it's important. There's no question it's a priority for this administration to get that contract awarded soon. And I think it's in the final stages of that happening.
Well, again, we're actually, rooting you on, and we want to see it get across the finish line. And again, Duffy is right. I mean, that's really going to, be a huge game changer. Mr. Carmel, back in about 2017, we passed the Vessel Contract Manager Authority for the multi-mission training vessel, which again has been a smashing success at the Philly shipyard. I think they're on the 5th, if not the 6th vessel for the Merit. Can you give us, again, a quick description of why the Vessel Contract Manager is the right model? And when we're talking about stimulating growth through the SHIPS Act, that really should be, at least the foundation of how contracting proceeds.
Yes, thank you, Congressman. It has been an outstanding success, and the reason is fundamentally it injects commercial common sense into what otherwise can be a pretty uncoordinated way of doing business. The ship manager that we used for that, is an extremely good company. They know how to build ships. They've done it for themselves, and experience matters in something like this. As you know, that contract has been extended for 2 MDA ships, so it's been great, but fundamentally it's commercial common sense rather than complicated government rules.
And looking back at it, I mean, really, it's just striking how, on time, within contract price. I mean, you can't ask for better than that. You know, one of the, when we spoke, you know, your sort of message, and you mentioned it in your opening remarks, is about cargo preference as a way of really driving growth as well. I mean, at some point, you know, people who operate these ships have to have, you know, a cargo to carry to make it sustainable over time. You know, I would just note, and I know there's a number of people who agree with me, the Jones Act is a cargo preference law that's been for a long time, and I think is fundamental to that. We have a waiver that we're in the middle of, and I would just ask Mr. Chairman to enter our article from oilprice.com, which is an oil industry media outlet, that Trump's waiver of Jones Act fails to cool oil prices. The Wichita State University has studied this problem since the waiver went into effect. It's saved approximately 3 cents a gallon in Northeast at best. But again, at the price of sacrificing that cargo preference.
Without objection,
I
Mr.
yield
Court.
back.
I now recognize the gentleman from Mississippi, Chairman Ezell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral Campbell, despite receiving nearly $25 billion to recapitalize cutters, aircraft, and offshore facilities, representing nearly 15 years of procurement funding, the service has failed to produce statutorily required acquisition reports and briefings. The Coast Guard is required to produce an annual 5-year capital investment plan no later than 60 days after the President submits his budget to Congress. The last plan we received covers fiscal year 2023. That plan was 3 years late and incomplete. When do you expect to produce the fiscal year 2027 capital investment plan?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the intent, and the Coast Guard, I can assure you that we are working very aggressively at putting together not only that capital investment plan, but all of the other reports that we know that we owe to Congress. So we are working very hard on that. One of the challenges, obviously, with the reconciliation and the massive influx of investment that brought with us, and the changes in our programs, we're still fine-tuning what that does for the following 5 years and beyond. So we'll be working on that, sir.
Thank you. The service is required to submit a biennial report to the Committee on the Status of the Coast Guard's major acquisition programs. This report was last produced 12 years ago. When do you plan to produce an updated major acquisition plan?
Chairman, as I stated before, we are working very hard on all of our overdue reports, sir. We will get them as soon as we can.
Okay. Do you believe the undertaking these planning requirements benefits the Coast Guard's procurement shipbuilding process? If so, why can't the Coast Guard produce these documents?
Chairman, I do believe that the planning documents do assist. I will also say that, first and foremost, we are very grateful for the relief that has been offered with the reconciliation for a lot of those pre-acquisition phase planning documents that are typically required that were not required. That actually has allowed us to move at speed and has allowed us to actually get contracts on the books for particularly the Arctic Security Cutter, name being one. So to go from appropriation to awarding contracts within a matter of 6 to 7 months is truly impressive, and that is due to the relief that's been afforded that. So we look forward to continue working with you and your committee to try to get some of those processes relieved more permanently.
Thank you. Force Design 2028 calls for the overall improvement to the Coast Guard's acquisition and contracting processes. Can you detail the specific changes that Force Design 2028 envisions to ensure the Coast Guard can deliver on its major acquisition plans?
Chairman, yes. Force Design 2028, among many things, has implemented a change, particularly on the materiel or systems side of the Coast Guard. And so we have reorganized our entire systems side of the organization, and we have we used to have one acquisition officer and one program executive officer. That was the position I held previously, that oversaw all of our acquisition programs, whether they were aircraft, ships, C5I systems. shore infrastructure. And so what we have done is we've created program, we've aligned, it's similar to the acts that the Navy has taken with program acquisition executives. We've created program executive officers and divided by those domains. So we now have a designated flag officer or SES in charge of each of the 5 domains: the surface domain, the air domain, the C5I domain, the shore infrastructure domain, and the robotics and autonomous systems. So that provides one point of accountability, one person and one team responsible for all of the acquisitions within that domain, but also the life cycle sustainment of those systems, which affords the team to be able to make prudent decisions, trade-off decisions on buying new and sustaining old. And I think we're going to see significant enhancements in our abilities in the future, sir.
Thank you, Admiral. Mr. Chairman, I yield back, and I have a few other questions that I'll submit for the record.
Thank you. I now want to recognize that Ranking Member Larson of the full Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. He has a statement that will have unanimous consent to enter that into the record.
Ask unanimous consent.
It's entered into the record. I now recognize my friend, the Ranking Member on the TNI Subcommittee, Mr. Carbajal.
Thank you, Chairman Kelly. Ms. Carmel, I introduced a bill that would raise the cargo preference requirement to 100% for all DOT cargoes. We know that one way to boost the U.S. flag fleet is to make sure they have the work. How would this cargo preference requirement impact the U.S. fleet going forward?
Thank you, sir. It depends on how you, I guess, define DOT cargo. If you mean cargo that ships that are subject to DOT MARAD, certainly it helps. We need government cargo, preference cargo, to sustain the programs we have now. We can't rebuild the fleet on government preference cargo. We actually need access to our nation's commerce to do that. But government cargo, preference cargo is essential to keeping what we have now. And so that will be extraordinarily helpful, and paired with, significant enforcement and oversight, that would be very important.
Thank you. Given that MARAD is tasked by statute to enforce cargo preference laws among other agencies, how would you rate their compliance?
Cargo preference avoidance is a problem across the spectrum in government agencies. Some agencies are better than others, but cargo preference avoidance is, in general, a problem. And it comes back to my opening statement. We have a system that is designed to fight itself. We have some parts of the system that reward cheap, and we have other parts of the system that demand resilience and robustness, and those two things are in conflict, and they need to be deconflicted.
Since the map calls for increased compliance across the whole of government, does DOT plan to voluntarily start mandating 100% preference?
We cannot voluntarily mandate 100% cargo preference, but we certainly can push for it. In our conversations with shippers, we remind them, and I think in the proposals that are coming your way, we address those issues. So yes, we are advocating that we have 100% compliance.
Thank you. Admiral Campbell, the Coast Guard has consistently run into issues with procurement of the cutters, most notably the OPCs and the PSCs. The service has suffered countless delays and is often in the position of needing further supplemental appropriations to complete these fleet recapitalization projects. What processes have you put in place that will ensure the Coast Guard's investments deliver vessels on time and on budget?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. So first, I would like to say that one of the many changes we put in place is to, and taking the advice of the Government Accountability Office, we put into place policy that dictates the design requirements before we go to production to ensure that we have a solid design and we know what it is that the shipyard's building. But I would like to to focus on the fact that although the OPC and the PSC programs have had a rough start, they are operating on all cylinders right now. Our Polar Security Cutter program has been moving ahead very rapidly, and they have already produced 26 of the 85 modules for that ship. And that's the equivalent weight, just to put it into perspective. Each module weighs about as much as one of our fast response cutters. So we have the equivalent weight of about 26 of those built to date. And we have, working with our integrated program office with our Navy partners, we have reworked the contract with Bollinger Shipyards and Bollinger, Mississippi, and are in the process of negotiating ships 2 and 3 as well. And thanks to the reconciliation bill, we have received enough funding to cover the cost for both of the first 2 ships and a lot of the ship number 3. So we are well on the way with our Polar Security Cutter program. Our Offshore Patrol Cutter program, Stage 2, is also moving ahead at speed. We have 2 ships that are under construction. The first one is already 36% complete. And the second one that just started construction this past summer is 4% and moving along rapidly at Austal. So we do believe that we've made changes to ensure the future productivity of our shipbuilding programs, and think we're going to see positive results, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm out of time. I yield back.
I'm going to recognize Mr. Whitman and Mr. Norcross, and then our votes have been called. So just to give everybody advised, I now recognize Chairman Whitman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate our witnesses joining me today. Mr. Potter, I want to begin with you. I want to talk about the concept of distributed shipbuilding. I think you and Secretary Phelan would agree that having more capability out there and being able to bring that to our build yards is key. We know there's underutilized capacity in the repair industry where we go through cycles where there's lots of ships in the yard and then none, and they have to let go workforce. You know, I think there is a leaning in by the shipbuilding industry to say, let's do more with the workforce and the capability we have in building things like parts and smaller manufacturers, but also modules. You know, we have to be able to do more within that realm. Give me your perspective, too, on are there other ways that we can leverage that capacity there? Because I don't think we fully leverage the manpower capacity and the production capacity in these various elements of the shipbuilding supply industrial base. And are there specific classes of ships that this is more suited for than others? Can we use it across all sectors of ships? And what can we do with this to help in both speed, that is timelines, and in cost, which are both drivers in what we need to improve in shipbuilding?
Congressman, thank you for the question. It's absolutely a centerpiece of this budget request and how we're able to procure 34 vessels, 18 Battle Force, 16 not. And so the idea of distributed shipbuilding is something that has been with the Navy and its prime contractors for a long time. So, you know, many of our large shipyards already do it. If you think about Electric Boat with Groton and Quonset Point, now Newport News with their Charleston facility, and I could go on. And so we're already in building things in various locations and then bringing them to a final assembly yard, you know, and kind of focusing on what our largest shipyards can only do and kind of the highest and best use of their workforce. And that is increasingly where we're going to. And it's really the shipbuilders themselves making business decisions and recognizing, you know, the business cases there to do more of this distributed shipbuilding and do it in a methodical way where in the best cases we've seen, you know, you start with a few relatively simple modules and then they kind of graduate up to more and more complex components and subassemblies, and then they're kind of taking over more of the ship. And I think in the case of destroyers in the Gulf Coast, we're going from less than 5 outsourced modules of the 77 or so to over 30, right? And that's a significant you know, change in how we're going to do business. So I think that will accelerate deliveries because as more of that work is moving out, that'll allow the build yards to relieve that pressure, focus the workforce more on the final assembly and delivery, test and trials. And it's really focusing on those choke points, and we have great industry partners to work with. And it's filling up, you know, small businesses, small yards, small manufacturing sites across the country. And that's another goal here. And so there is the uplift across our industrial base. It's going to have knock-on effects with commercial shipbuilding. And we think the demand signal coming in this budget with $65 billion in Navy shipbuilding is the thing to really bring distributed shipbuilding mainstream.
That's great.
Mr. Potter, thank you. Administrator Carmel, great to see you again. Listen, I appreciate all that you're doing. We look at the Maritime Action Plan and looking at how do we get the most out of shipbuilding capacity, both on the commercial and on the military shipbuilding side. I would argue there's some other aspects of what happens within government, especially on the agricultural side, that provide kind of an underpinning of guarantees to make sure that the investments can take place. You see things like crop insurance, you see things like loan guarantees and rural development funds that go into trying to make sure that we underpin the agriculture industry. The same sort of concepts, I think, could be used in the shipbuilding industry to make sure we have that underpinning, that framework, that foundation that protects the investments that shipbuilders need to make, in addition to some of the CapEx that's available to them. Give me your perspective, too, and give me some ideas on the things that you've done and the study elements that compares some of the policies that have occurred in other sectors and the support in the maritime industry that we need to make sure that there is a long-term viewpoint about how we sustain shipbuilding and continue to have it on an upward trajectory.
Thank you, sir, for the question. Actually, and that's true, we have done a lot of structural support. As it happens, I have white papers on everything, and I did one on the agricultural model versus the Maritime Action Plan, and there is a lot we can learn from that. As you mentioned, income and revenue safety nets, federal risk sharing programs, domestic engineering demand, engineering domestic demand, scalable credit, and but I think mostly an enduring institutional champion, I guess, would be the best way to put it. For the oil industry, we have in the past implemented emergency import restrictions directly to create price supports. In other words, drive up the cost of oil for consumers. So we have done things like that in the past for oil. We all remember the activities that were undertaken to support the auto industry in the 80s. Same thing, voluntary import constraints. And at that time, we also mandated imports on U.S. flagged ships. So all critical sectors at one time or another have received support, and we should do the same thing for America.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Gentleman's time's expired. Now recognize Mr. Norcross.
Thank you, Chairman, and certainly the witnesses for being here today. Ironic, we started this morning over at the Navy League with Mr. Whitman and Mr. Courtney talking about the conditions of our shipbuilding. We're going to end today on this important issue. First and foremost, about the distributed shipbuilding, we look at the old Philadelphia Navy Yard, which is now the new Philadelphia Navy Yard, Rhodes Industry, who is building an incredibly important role of the Columbia class. And they're using a rather unique way of building their workforce. They have their core group of workers. The vast majority of them are certified nuclear welders. But when there's additional work, they go to the hiring hall, the millwrights, and hire off the bench those certified. So when that increase of work comes along, they have a workforce waiting and working other jobs. And when it comes back down, they get laid off. This is a normal course of event of hiring halls across this nation. And I encourage you to take a look at it. It's doing quite well over there, and I think it can be replicated in many other places. But the main item I want to talk about today is we know why we've lost shipyards. Certainly the demand was down years ago somewhat, but nowhere near the amount as we wanted to save money, and we offshored it. The idea of looking at how important that reliable workforce and suppliers in our country has now reared its ugly head. We're finding out the hard way. And a year or so ago, with the last NDAA, I had a Buy American provision, which talks about domestic content. And it's not because, hey, I want it in my state or we need to do this. It's because we need a secure supply chain that is made in our country. So it builds up over the years any major defense acquisition. So we're waiting for the first report out of the Department of Defense and haven't received that yet. It's a little bit late, which I guess is not a surprise. But the premise behind it is to build our workforce, our supply chain, and yet the Coast Guard gets a little bit different of a twist. They are not under the same constraints as the U.S. Navy. So the question for the Admiral is, in the Arctic Security Cutter Program, that's being done a little bit differently, the U.S., Canada, Finland. But still, the idea of building a supply chain with our friends and not our enemies. There has been much discussion. My office has received several phone calls of the propulsion system that might be coming from China. Can you confirm that or say it's not coming from China?
Congressman, I know nothing about a propulsion system coming from China.
I found it rather remarkable, but there's not that many suppliers in the U.S. that can do this. And the suggestion was not in the time frame that we needed it. So given the conditions we are in with China, they want to be friends one minute, and they want to chop our head off the next. I would find that disturbing, and I think most people in this room. Can you just take a moment that I have left and talk about the difference between when we purchase things through the Coast Guard, what systems of Buy American provisions that you are adhere to versus the Navy?
Congressman, thank you for the question. I would say that the Coast Guard actually has pretty much the same requirements that the Navy has for Buy America as well as buying ships. Our law is under Title 14, whereas the Navy is under Title 10, but it basically reads the same way. In the situation that we're in with the Arctic security cutters, the President made a decision and signed an agreement with Finland that it was in the national security interest of the nation to partner with Finland to build the first few ships with the intent of onshoring that capability to the United States. So that's exactly what we're doing. So the first few ships are going to be built in shipyards in Finland, the first few Arctic security cutters, but the intent and the plan is to onshore that capability and build the remaining ships in the United States at 2 different shipyards.
Well, that's exactly what we want to do, and that's why the Jones Act is so important. That has just kept us on life support in the system that actually buys and certainly runs this. With that, I yield back.
Votes have been called, so we will recess the hearing until after votes have finished. We will notify member offices when to return, and we reconvene. We'll reconvene immediately after votes. Thank you. get what I say? We reconvene. And then we got, yep. You ready? The hearing is reconvened. I now recognize Mr. McDowell for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you to the witnesses for being here today, and thank you for the grace and letting us take a little break to go and vote. We appreciate it. Mr. Carmel, it's not hard to look at the state of our maritime industrial base and not draw comparisons with the capabilities and the output that we're seeing from China. Between the United States and China, who has more shipyards?
Thank you, sir. China has more, and more importantly, they have shipyards that are bigger. We, compared to the Chinese, don't have what could be considered a large yard.
Who is building a majority of the new ships that are ordered globally between the United States and China?
China is by far building most of them. In some cases, like railroads and MPPs, are building virtually all of them. The United States produces about 0.1% of global shipbuilding, but none of our ships are built for export. They're all domestic.
So the Chinese commercial fleet is more than 5,000 vessels. Ours is less than 100. And so it seems to me like we have a big problem on our hands. But thankfully, you did offer us a glimmer of hope in your testimony. And you said that in maritime system determined by reliability, access, and stability, our advantages are decisive. And so what gives us an advantage by those metrics, and how can we capitalize on those advantages?
Thank you, sir. The Chinese economy, the Chinese process is very state-centric and very command-driven, and that gives them a lot of ability to marshal resources and direct activity as they've done. However, the weaknesses there are they don't deal with change very well. The Schumpeterian creative destruction that is a hallmark of the U.S. economy, and we've kind of lost touch with, are things that Chinese simply can't deal with. So what we need to do is change the terms of competition with China to one that favors us, which is dynamism, innovation, that sort of thing, because they do not deal with that very well. We can, and that's how we can beat them. This is not a lost cause. We can do this.
So what do you see as the biggest regulatory barriers affecting our maritime industrial base, and what progress has the administration made in removing those barriers?
The regulatory challenges are twofold, so I'll start with shipyards. In order to compete in international shipbuilding at scale on the way we need to build new ships. New shipyards. We cannot build ships if we don't have the shipyards, so we need to build shipyards first. That is an imperative, so things like permitting reform, that sort of stuff has to be done. We need to restructure the way we do marine financing, which we're working on, those things. In terms of the U.S. flag fleet, we still suffer from a regulatory burden that needs to be changed. Unlike the rest of the world, we have two systems of governance rather than one. The rest of the world just has IMO, SOLAS kind of thing. We have IMO, SOLAS, and then we have Coast Guard on top of it. On the other hand, that extra layer of regulation produces nothing in terms of safety and things like that. I use as a proxy for that things like the Paris MOU, where the Chinese are, I believe, 12 or 14, and we are 22nd. So they perform substantially better than we do, even with this extra regulatory burden. So we need to deal with that, and that process is starting. The reflag process is way too cumbersome. Gap analysis, for instance, is a very expensive, time-consuming process that if we wanted to reflag on our own, we would not do. So lots of things that can change to help us.
Rear Admiral Campbell, the Coast Guard has had challenges carrying out major acquisitions in the past, and HR 1 included $14 billion, as you know, in funding for new Coast Guard cutters. What steps are you taking to put the Coast Guard in a position to spend that money efficiently?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. As I stated earlier, I believe we are off to a great start with our shipbuilding program, executing the programs of record that we already had in place. So with that $14 billion towards our shipbuilding programs, we have been able to fund, we will be able to fund, as I mentioned earlier, both the first and second polar security cutter in full, as well as a big chunk of the third polar security cutter. I failed to mention earlier, but our OPC Stage 2 program, we've already started construction on the first 2 ships, but there's enough funding in that bill to allow us to basically buy out the remaining options for the completion of Stage 2, which will get us a total of 11 ships from that stage. And having the opportunity to buy those buy out all those options at once should help us to be, and the shipyard to be a lot more efficient as we move forward, being able to forecast demand signal and knowing that they have those on contract. Additionally, the Arctic Security Cutter ships are already on contract as well, and I talked about those. We're distributing those through 4 different shipyards. As I mentioned earlier, 2 of them initially will be built in Finland, but then we're going to onshore that to enhance our shipbuilding, ice-breaking shipbuilding capacity in the United States. So I think we're using those dollars wisely, and really appreciate the support, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I now recognize the gentleman from California and my partner on the SHIPS Act, Mr. Garamendi.
And as you went through, I think I finally punched it hard enough. When you started the hearing, you opened up an important part of this. The Navy has trouble building all the ships we need, on time and on cost. The domestic shipbuilding industry is essentially the Jones Act. The Ships for America Act and the Maritime Security Program that was put out by the administration addresses a fundamental national security problem and positions the United States to once again reemerge as a full-on maritime country. We will have, with the SHIPS Act, the opportunity to meet the issues that Mr. Carmel has put forward and Admiral and Mr. Potter, you put forward by providing a strong domestic base for the manufacturing and just as important, for the operations of the ship. So the full SHIPS Act addresses the totality of issues that we need to put in place and address to rebuild our maritime industry. And Mr. Chairman, I thank you for your leadership on this. I would ask unanimous consent to enter into the record the text of the SHIPS Act.
Without objection.
And also enter into the record a section-by-section review and explanation of each of the sections of the SHIPS Act.
Without objection.
And, of course, my brilliant opening remarks also to be entered into the record, and I'll cut them short for time's sake. I'm waiting.
Without objection. I wanted to object, though, John.
I hope one of the... Yeah, I know what you're up to. And thank you for your statement at the press conference today. We must move this legislation. The Navy will not be able to meet its requirements on naval vessels without a strong commercial sector to work side by side with it. The legislation that we put forward with the SHIPS Act provides for the men and women that will build commercial ships for the maritime industry, but also for the Navy ships. And it'll bring into it the unions and others that are going to be absolutely essential. Mr. Carmel, you spoke earlier about the need for cargo. None of this works without cargo. In the Ships Act, there is what is known as the energizing section, which will bring to the maritime industry and the commercial petroleum products. A percentage of what we export, and we're the biggest exporting nation in the world, will be on American ships built to provide them, and along with the sailors and personnel that are necessary. All of the elements that we know have to be available in order to totally rebuild our industrial base and the ships manufacturing, as well as the personnel for those ships, are in the Ships Act. It would be foolish of me to say it is complete. It is robust. It covers most of the issues that we know of today. I'm sure others will be found. We must get this done this year. Mr. Chairman, I know you and our Senate colleagues who are the lead on this, together with the almost 160 members of Congress that have signed on, are dedicated to get this done. With that, let's move it forward. I thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and for the ranking members and Mr. Enzel for your help on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Garamendi. I now recognize Mr. Webster.
Thank you, Chairman. Admiral Campbell, after years of delays, the Polar Security Program appears to be on track. So, what do you attribute to that? What kind of factors do you say this made it happen to turn around, to do the turnaround?
Thank you for that question, Congressman. I think as a host of things. One, our partnership with the Navy as an integrated program management office has gotten stronger over the years. But I would also say, more importantly, is that Bollinger, Mississippi, acquiring VT Halter and taking over that contract. And while initially it was a little rough to figure out exactly what they got their hands around, working through that and figuring out exactly what was needed to finish that design and get it to a level that we could actually start production. They have taken a lot of very innovative approaches at particularly with working with the type of steel that the Polar Security Cutter is designed with, EQ47. It's a very high-strength steel, but very difficult to work with in the shipbuilding industry. Has to be preheated. And they have taken a lot of initiatives to institute a lot of innovation to be able to work with that metal. We've also invested in some capital expenditures to help the shipyard with some automated welding, robotic welding equipment, as well as cutting tables, which have drastically reduced the labor hours required to build such a large ship. But I think it was a team effort, and I think they are moving in the right direction. As I mentioned earlier, there's already 26 modules that are under construction right now. If you get a chance to come down and visit, I highly recommend it, sir. It's truly impressive, and we are looking forward to the first PSC being delivered by 2030.
Well, there was the Coast Guard has entered into some, I think 11, purchasing 11 Arctic security cutters. 4 of those vessels are going to be done by the Finns, and under the presidential waiver, I guess they get to kind of skip the domestic construction requirements for Coast Guard. How will this unique partnership with that country benefit the United States in domestic shipbuilding?
Congressman, I believe our partnership with Finland and Canada through the ICE Pack has been already beneficial with enhancing our overall knowledge and understanding, particularly of building icebreakers. As you well know, we have not built a heavy icebreaker in the United States in over 50 years, so we're kind of getting back on the horse there. But the Finns have obviously built quite a few icebreakers. They're very familiar with building icebreakers. That's an essential piece of their economy. So I had the opportunity to go visit some of their shipyards and learn from some of their experiences over there. And I think that the U.S. shipbuilding industry does have a lot to learn, and the Arctic Security Cutter provides the first partnership that I believe between Finland and the United States in that regard to start building them in Finland and then move that capacity, more importantly, into the United States to enhance our shipbuilding base.
What missions will these vessels support, and are they capable of doing all polar missions?
Congressman, the Arctic Security Cutter is going to enable the Coast Guard to establish the long overdue and much needed presence in the Arctic region, and eventually we're a program of record. Our identified need is to get up to a total of, I believe, 18 Arctic Security Cutters. These first 11 will be the first step in that direction, but they will allow us to operate, get to a point where we can provide continuous presence in the Arctic to assert our sovereignty, particularly on the northern Arctic shorelines of Alaska, and also to counter the Chinese and Russian fleet that have been operating in that area unencumbered for some time now. And so we look forward to being able to match with them and have our ships side by side when they come into our seas.
Awesome. Are you back?
Gentleman yields back. I just want to remind everyone we're a maritime nation and we're an Arctic nation, but if we don't act like it, we aren't. So we need to act like that. And with that, I recognize the gentlelady from Maryland, my friend, Miss Elfreth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank you and the ranking members for having this important, critical hearing. And it's one of those challenges I think everybody in this room, including everybody in the audience, agrees this is at a crisis level point after decades and generations of just lack of focus here. So I hope this is the Congress that can get it right. I do want to start, though, Mr. Potter, with we just had Indo-PACOM in front of us, General Paparo, and we spoke a little bit about data and AI and making sure we have the right information, the facts, and then to help us get through some of the critical maintenance, backlog issues, parts and pieces issues. So I want to just focus in 2025, the DoD's Inspector General's analysis of spare parts for Navy ships found that the parts inventory accuracy was between 83% and 95%, which is below the minimum inventory accuracy of 98%. So I don't think it's like horseshoes and hand grenades. I think we got to get it right, that are needed for ship readiness. This example highlights the IT and data integrity challenges, I think, that are a huge part of ship maintenance as a challenge here. When we talk about leveraging AI, that's one thing, but if we don't have the raw data correct, then we're not going to actually be able to solve these things in real time, and we're going to have ships sitting in dry docks much longer than they absolutely should because we just didn't get the problem right from the beginning. So can you talk to me about the steps that are being taken to fix the outdated systems and ensure more reliable data goes in so we can plan better before a ship even gets to dock and know exactly what's broken and have those pieces, some of which take 6 months, 18 months to order if those parts even exist, if the manufacturers are even in business anymore because we've let this erode so badly. Can you talk to me about what we are doing to fix that essential piece of this puzzle?
Congresswoman, yes, it's absolutely imperative that the spare parts in our inventory management that goes with that are on time and ordered with the lead time necessary to support these maintenance availabilities. And it is actually a key component of the Navy's audit readiness and the inventory of materiel. And we're making huge strides there. And I know I can take for the record kind of our audit spare part initiative and using data to ensure we have the fidelity on what our inventory is and in our stock systems.
So we're at between 83 and 95% for 2025. Choose your own adventure. This time next year when you're in front of this joint committee, where would you like to be with that number?
Yeah, so 95% or higher, right? We need to get better, no doubt about it. I think we've got the tools and we're getting better with our tools at that, recognizing the importance of the digital tools as well as the inventory that's kind of real-time raw data that we're tapped into. Beyond that, we're using procurement funding, which is 3-year funding, to pay for maintenance availabilities more and more. And that was a pilot program Congress gave us probably 5 to 10 years ago that we've continued to expand, recognizing 1-year O&M money is often not a long enough period of time to get the parts early enough to support availabilities.
Especially if they're not made anymore.
Correct. And we're moving up the planning time to more like 4 or 5 months, if not longer, before the availability starts to lock in the package to be able to order the parts sooner. So
I appreciate that.
yes, ma'am.
I do have to move on. Thank you, though, for that, and I look forward to working with you. Admiral Campbell, you mentioned Coast Guard Yard Baltimore, which is actually in my district, and I had the opportunity to visit and saw the critical need for that first investment tranche of money. We're talking about facilities that were built for World War II and have not gotten a whole lot of love since then. So I appreciate your focus there. And I do want to, again, congratulate you on the partnership with Finland and Canada, and really urge you to get that co-production shoreside, stateside as quickly as possible. Can you just give me a brief update on the plans to actually spend down that money at Coast Guard Yard Baltimore? When can we expect, if you have a timeline on the dry dock, or when are we going to get shovels in the ground there?
Thank you, Congresswoman. Appreciate the question, but more importantly, appreciate the support of our Coast Guard Yard. As I mentioned in my opening statement, the Coast Guard Yard is a critical part of the public maritime industrial base. It's one of the public yards, and it does an enormous amount of work to keep all of our ships underway and doing the critical missions that we need to do. So we also appreciate the financial support that we've received, and we do have plans underway to acquire an actual dry dock that does have the capacity to lift our OPCs and our national security cutters, which we don't have that capacity right now with the existing lift. We also have plans that we're working with the Army Corps of Engineers to conduct dredging so that those ships can actually get into that area, as well as critical infrastructure upgrades in that whole facility. As you saw, it is dated. There is a lot of work that needs to be done there, but we are getting started on that right away. And I can get back to you on specific details on when we plan.
Thank you. Please keep us posted.
Absolutely.
I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank the gentlewoman. I now recognize Mr. Moreland from Guam.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to our witnesses today. Rear Admiral Campbell, as we evaluate the Coast Guard's shipbuilding strategy, do you foresee this capacity supporting additional FRCs becoming available for home porting in Guam?
Congressman, absolutely. The fast response cutter has been a huge success story, and it's an enormous capability enhancement for our service. To date, we have already delivered 62 of the 77 that are funded on our program right now, and 2 more are programmed to be included in the FY26 budget when that gets approved. And so some of those ships are definitely going to be, we're looking to push them out into the Guam operational area, sir.
If you can just briefly say the importance of that area, what it is to Indo-PACOM, and why the Coast Guard needs it, please.
Yes, sir. We recognize the importance of that entire theater, and we've been taking efforts to move more ships and more capacity out there. We understand the importance of having presence and to continue to build our relationships with our partner nations out there, where the Coast Guard plays a key role. As well as working with, as a member of the Joint Force with the U.S. Navy and our Indo-PACOM partners.
Thank you. Godspeed, sir. Administrator Kamel, so with today's focus on the shipbuilding industry base, that's important, but equally important role is MARAD and DOD that they play on Guam for Guam's port, our only port. And the Port of Guam is the only place for commercial ships to dock, playing a vital role for civilian and military flow of goods, food, and supplies. But it's at a crossroad. The port's cranes are aging and nearing the end of its lifespan. Now, for years, we've advocated for federal funding to be used to purchase new gantry cranes for the port, which would support both military and civilian community. Can you please tell us how MARAD is working to address the issue of the aging port infrastructure in Guam and in the region, sir?
Thank you, sir. As you know, MARAD has the PIDP program, and that is the principal mechanism we use for that. And so that's how we deal with it.
So the Port Authority has initiated that process. Do you see the importance, or will that be funding available? Are we looking at this happening, and how soon?
Well, the PIDP process, no question, happens. We have grants that might, were they released today? Yeah. Well, in fact, while I was here, the last round was announced, so I don't know what they are because I was here. But, and the next round, the submissions are due in June, so that's an ongoing process.
I appreciate the acknowledgement there, but also that the importance of these things. I'm surprised it lasted the last typhoon we had just a couple of weeks ago. So, and the process of building a crane takes, I don't know, you have an idea? I think it's two years or more.
Yes.
So just to get going, we got to get it going quickly. I really appreciate if you put priority on for Guam because of our Indo-PACOM mission. It'd be most appreciated, and we'll be sure to follow the regulations on making sure this gets through correctly with the approval of MIRAD.
Sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman.
I now recognize Ms. Gillen, and I hope I pronounced that right.
You did. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'm proud to represent the men and women of Coast Guard Station Jones Beach in my district, the 4th Congressional District of New York. I support increased funding for the Coast Guard and all of our maritime services, including the U.S. Merchant Marines. Nassau County is home to the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy at Kings Point, New York, one of our nation's 5 service academies. For more than 80 years, the Merchant Marine Academy has been the pride of Long Island, preparing generations of Americans to serve our country and strengthen our maritime and national security. As you may know, the Academy's campus is in dire need of investment and upgrades. Last December, I wrote a letter to the chairman and ranking member of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee asking them to organize a visit for members to come to the campus and to evaluate this need for updates and modernization. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to offer this letter into the record. I'd like to offer something into the record. Thank you. So I'm grateful to Chairman Graves and Ranking Member Larson and Secretary Duffy for heeding my call and organizing a trip to Kings Point. Tomorrow, my colleagues and I will have the chance to tour the campus and speak with the Academy leadership to see firsthand what we can do to support our midshipmen. I'm proud also to lead a bipartisan legislation introduced by my colleague from Long Island, Representative Andrew Garbarino, to authorize more than $1 billion for a full-scale campus modernization of the Academy. I'm glad Secretary Duffy and the Trump administration have made it a priority to help secure these much-needed upgrades. I'm also glad that the text and funding provided by our bill has been included in the Ships for America Act. So, getting to my question, Administrator Carmel, can you explain how the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy is critical to our defense readiness and a strong commercial maritime industry? And specifically, how the funding provided in our bill will help MARAD and the Academy implement their modernization plan?
Thank you, Congresswoman. The graduates of Kings Point, of which I proudly am one, so I'm an alumni, occupy critical positions in industry, and then, of course, provide, most importantly, officers for the ships and the strategic sea lift officers that are necessary in times of conflict. So, as a source of manpower, both ashore and afloat, Kings Point is a critical source of labor for them. Kings Point itself, in order to attract the right level of talent, we certainly need the right level of infrastructure. You can't attract decent kids to a school that is in disarray. You also can't attract decent faculty to a school that's in disarray. We should never forget that the primary output of Kings Point is what's between the ears of the kids that walk through the gate. And so faculty is important in this. And so the necessary funding, it goes a long way to rectifying the poor material condition of the school, which is hard to study, it's hard to attract the right kids, and it's hard to attract the right faculty. So those are essential things to getting Kings Point back on track.
Thank you so much, and I hope we can work together to make sure that we see the modernization realized at the school. So in February, the administration released its Maritime Action Plan detailing the administration's actions and recommendations for rebuilding shipbuilding capacity, reforming the workforce, protecting the maritime industrial base, and strengthening national security. One recommendation that caught my attention was for the use of artificial intelligence and other emerging technologies to expand domestic shipbuilding capacity. Rear Admiral Campbell, how is the Coast Guard currently integrating AI and other technologies into their shipbuilding acquisition and design? And what additional resources or guidance from Congress would help the Coast Guard to fully leverage AI in a safe and responsible way in its procurement and design process?
Thank you for the question, Congresswoman. I would say we're probably at the early stages of finding how we're going to integrate AI into our shipbuilding process. It is definitely a priority for the service to lean forward with all kinds of technology, AI being one of them. I would say, in the early stages, ways that we've demonstrated use already are somewhat, maybe on the smaller end, but in preparing a lot of the planning documentation and kind of the administrative work that goes with that, using AI to help, formulate that and finalize that does reduce staff time and has helped already. But we do need to press further into the actual design phase and working with our naval architects and firms and shipyards around the nation to integrate AI into the design, as well as into helping to optimize production and how the ships are actually built in the shipyard.
Thank you so much. My time has expired and I yield back.
Thank you. I now recognize the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Bergman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good to see all of you again. Administrator Carmel, the Jones Act is the fundamental law of the U.S. Great Lakes maritime industry, which runs directly through and around my district from the mines of Michigan and Minnesota on Lake Superior to the steel mills to the south on the Great Lakes. It is also the fundamental law for transportation of stone and other commodities on Great Lakes Lakers. This is the most American of American industries, moving U.S. raw materials on American ships with American crews to American domestic manufacturing and other facilities. I strongly encourage the administration to use Jones Act waivers only when necessary and keep any Jones Act waiver as narrow and short and as limited as possible. I am hopeful that this waiver will not be extended. As we have talked about, and everybody here who has asked questions, the need for more trained mariners here in our country. It's time for us to balance that. We know it'll be a balancing act based on times. And in light of the recent U.S. actions affecting Venezuelan crude exports, including the U.S. Coast Guard's physical control over the cargo aboard seized tankers, the State Department's role in arranging the sale of that cargo, and proceeds being held in accounts controlled by the U.S. Treasury, do you, Mr. Carmel, consider Venezuelan crude oil moved under these arrangements to be, quote, government-impelled, end quote, cargo, and therefore subject to the Cargo Preference Act of 1954?
Thank you, sir, for the question. The situation around Venezuela is relatively unique. I can't recall a time when we've had to deal with this. And from an international law perspective, extraordinarily complex. And that is a question related to international law, and I am not qualified to answer it. I can only say that if the determination is made that it is, we'll execute appropriately.
Okay, well then we will, if you have any names or phone numbers that we can contact to get a legal answer to that, I would be most appreciative of that, because we do need an answer.
Yes, sir.
Okay, Mr. Potter, current and future naval platforms need an operating system modeled after the commercial automotive industry that can integrate weapons, sensors, and hull mechanical and engineering, HM&E, those systems, and rapidly provide software updates. How is the Navy looking to integrate such a commercially proven operating system into warships?
Yeah, Congressman, on our most advanced destroyers, we're already moving in that direction where we have agile software development, and as we're seeing new threats, we're now able to update the libraries and the the software and the combat system in, hours or days instead of weeks or months. And so that is tactically relevant, and it's very important to us that we have that kind of ability to agilely update software. But as you can appreciate, those are very complex combat systems with a lot of code, and it's very specific to military purposes that is not resident in the commercial industry. But we do have HM&E systems, and best practice is using our land-based test site in Philadelphia to update all the software there before we send it to our ships. And we're trying to have, and by using the government as the integrator for many, many different types of software and original equipment manufacturers in our engineering plants, we're able to relatively quickly update software and integrate new systems by having the configuration control within the Navy. On commercial ships, there's more opportunity there to leverage commercial technology and just buy off the shelf. And so we are going with a commercial design for our new landing ship medium, and we are going, to the extent possible, on the 16 non-battle force ships we're buying with commercial designs that will fully leverage the commercial digital tools and design products that come with them. And we'd look to use those to update the ships throughout their life.
Thank you very much. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Now recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Petronas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral, great to see you. I think you know me well enough. I get pretty emotional. And I appreciate your service of what you've done so far with the Coast Guard. But OPC is something that I can't turn loose of. And I know there's, where it boils down to me is I look at, there's hundreds of millions of dollars being sitting in a yard in Northwest Florida when a president wants a golden fleet of ships. And hull 1 is 90%, hull 2 is 50%, hull 3 is 30%, hull 4 is 15% complete. There's discrepancies, there's finger pointing. I think the trust has been burnt between the shipbuilder and the Coast Guard. And I'm getting spun up because I think there's taxpayers' money that is not being utilized. I at one point was very sympathetic to the Coast Guard. I get very sympathetic with Eastern. And I think the analogy I used with you the last time we visited on this was the Coast Guard's a 16-year-old looking out the front yard, and there's a Corvette sitting on blocks, and you're ready for that car. You want your car. You deserve that car, but it's not finished. And so the anxiety of the fight that's gone on between the contractor who has had its shortcomings, and I looked at, just did a little back of the math napkin here work. There's 4 different presidential administrations, 6 DHS secretaries, 4 commandants, 3 sat in your spot, and we don't have a boat that's operational. And I know Austell is doing a fine job, but they're in the single digits, I guess, in completion based on what you said earlier. I don't necessarily see this going in reverse, but I definitely don't like seeing hundreds of millions of dollars in taxpayers' money not being utilized for the good of protecting our coastlines. I think the Coast Guard is one of the greatest acquirers of human intelligence we have. The trip that we got spent together created a love that I have for your service. And I had no idea what you did, what you entailed, what y'all did around the world. And I don't think members in this process realize the type of commitment you make to what we get to be proud about having the safety and security of our nation. And I think you deserve these boats, and I want you to have these boats. But how do we get back and get those investments back underway? How do we go back and fix the trust that we've gotten from the taxpayers to spend that money, and those vessels are just sitting there rusting? I don't want to blindside you, but I know it's something you've been thinking about, and I think this project has probably been a little bit of a tar baby. We get excited about what's over at Austell, but we're not thinking about what's still sitting in a Florida yard that wants to build ships. And I don't talk to Eastern on a regular basis, but I just do care about the investment that's there. I'll stand ready for whatever you have to respond to.
Congressman, well, First and foremost, I want to thank you for your comments and your praise of the Coast Guard and the many missions that we do, as you stated, around the world. And it was a pleasure.
24/7.
Yes, sir. It was a pleasure to travel with you and have the opportunity to talk. And I know we have had conversations about the situation with Eastern. I guess I will first start off by saying, as far as wanting that car, the OPC, I am 100% certain that that ship is going to be a fantastic addition to the Coast Guard fleet when they get operational and hit the fleet. Unfortunately, with Eastern and Stage 1 contract, we are at a standstill, and we are negotiating, in the process of negotiating with them. So that's about all I can share as far as where we're going. We hope to come to a resolution. Yes, sir.
Okay, I just, I was in the restaurant business for 30 years of my life. I know how hard people work to provide taxpayers' dollars that we get to be trustees over. And like I said, when I see that type of investment over some boats that are pretty cool, I'd like to see them be utilized. But again, at first-in-class ship, largest contract in the history of the Coast Guard, you know, that many different people have an oversight and development of it. I really, I guess, I almost feel like, you know, the hell with the change orders. This isn't the first time we have had struggles as a country getting ships built as of challenges with meeting the specifications that change from time to time. You know, get the things finished, and then we'll dry dock them at a later date to get the things done that you want to get done. Thank you for your time.
Gentleman yields back. We're now going to reset. I thank the witnesses. You guys did a phenomenal job. Thank you for being here and highlighting something that is so important. I thank you for your time. I thank you for your hard work for this great nation. We're going to recess briefly to reset the table with our next panel of witnesses, and we'll start back as soon as the table's set. With that, we're in recess. thank the witnesses for being so patient, and we wanted to have y'all all on one panel, but we couldn't do that. I thank y'all for waiting patiently. We had votes and everything else in between, but I thank y'all. And with that, Dr. Eric Labs is a senior analyst for Naval Forces and Weapons at the Congressional Budget Office. Dr. Labs, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairman Ezel, Chairman Kelly, Representative Carbajal, and Representative Courtney, members of the subcommittees. Thank you for inviting me to discuss the state of shipbuilding and the maritime industrial base. I would like to submit my statement for the record and emphasize a few key points. For more than 20 years, the Navy has endeavored to build a larger fleet. In that time, the Navy's goals have ranged from 306 to most recently 381 ships. As a result, every Navy 30-year shipbuilding plan since at least 2011 has proposed building a larger fleet by purchasing more ships and sometimes by extending the life of existing ships. Yet the Navy has not increased the fleet nearly as much as it has hoped, and the ships it buys are getting more expensive. The reasons for that are varied. 20 years ago, during the global war on terror, the Navy did not receive as much funding as it needed to build a much larger fleet. More recently, the challenge lies more with the services and the industry's inability to build ships in a timely manner. In the face of the headwinds of COVID and the decline of interest in manufacturing jobs, the Navy progressively increased the demand for naval tonnage. Between 2014 and 2024, the amount of naval tonnage under construction rose by 80%. That growth required a substantial increase in shipyard labor, and the shipbuilders were not able to keep up. Ships now take a lot longer to build. Destroyers and amphibious ships used to take 5 years to build. Yesterday's 2027 budget materials now show 11 years for destroyers and 10 years for amphibious assault ships, not the 9 years I show in the written statement. In the 2000s, attack submarines took 6 years to build. Now they take 10, which is also an increase from last year. The services and industry are working hard on this, but we have not turned the corner yet. As of this past November, attack submarine production has averaged 1.1 boats per year for the past 2 years. The result is a fleet that is much smaller than it otherwise would have been. Between 2019 and 2040, the Navy lost and will lose 234 ship service years from ships that should have been commissioned but were not. In the critical period from 2026 to 2030, the fleet will be smaller by an average of 20 ships, mostly a loss of attack submarines and destroyers. Under the Navy's 2025 shipbuilding plan, the demand for naval tonnage would continue. Between now and 2034, the average amount of tonnage under construction would increase by another 45%. The Trump administration has not released its long-term shipbuilding plan yet, but the FY 2027 budget request and FYDP indicates an aggressive effort to build up the fleet and promises even more tonnage. Based on what we know so far, the cancellation of the Constellation-class frigate and the inauguration of the FFX program could be beneficial to the industrial base over the long term. Conversely, the new battleship program, regardless of its programmatic merits, would represent a substantial additional burden to the industrial base. When I testified last spring before Chairman Kelly's subcommittee, I stated then that, in my view, nothing is more important than addressing the critical labor shortages that afflict all of the shipbuilding and public maintenance yards. For years, recruitment and retention at all the major shipyards has been difficult. However, efforts to increase pay and improve working conditions are having some positive effects. Ingalls has signed a new 5-year labor agreement that will increase pay between 40% and 45% over 5 years. Ingalls' voluntary attrition has fallen to around 15% before those pay increases had taken effect, although overall attrition still remains stubbornly high. Pay increases at Bath and Electric Boat have seen voluntary attrition fall below 10%, such that its workforce is now gaining experience. As the services think about their future fleet, the need for highly skilled labor in the industrial base should be a paramount consideration in the service's long-term shipbuilding plans. The Navy would be smart to structure those plans in ways that preserve the labor forces in the industrial base. It should feather in new ship designs or larger quantities so as to keep perturbations to the workforces to the barest minimum. That is a critical lesson learned from the last 20 years of naval shipbuilding challenges. Continuing a theme I discussed last year, any policy that improves the labor situation is worth considering, including raising wages, improving benefits and quality of life, automation, and even tax benefits. For example, if the federal government were to give a large tax exemption to shipyard workers, that would be a way to effectively increase wages without disrupting shipbuilding contracts or contract negotiations. In this modern economy, where manufacturing represents only 10% of the gross domestic product, which is down from 20% in 1980, Skillful management of labor in the maritime and industrial base will be a central and ongoing challenge. I would like to close by repeating what I said last year. It has taken us a long time to get into this situation, and it's going to take a long time to get out of it. It will take a lot of hard work, time, and money to solve. 1 year later, while there are a few encouraging indicators of improvement, that still remains true. And right now, I fear we are adding more challenges faster than we are fixing them. Thank you, and I would be happy to respond to any questions the subcommittee might have.
I thank you, Dr. Labs. I now recognize Ms. Shelby Oakley. She is the Director of Contracting and National Security Acquisitions for the Government Accountability Office. Ms. Oakley, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairman Kelly, Ranking Members Courtney and Carbajal, and Ms. Elfreth. Thank you for having me here today to speak with you. I look forward to discussing our work on Navy and Coast Guard shipbuilding. Working closely with both services gives me a broad perspective on the shipbuilding challenges that are facing our nation. Investment and focus on the maritime industrial base are at levels we haven't seen in decades. The Navy and the Coast Guard have received historic funding increases, and the proposed SHIPS Act and Administration's Maritime Action Plan both underscore a renewed national focus on shipbuilding capacity. That creates a real opportunity, but it also raises the stakes. Many of the same issues that have affected shipbuilding programs for nearly 2 decades haven't gone away, and in some cases have gotten worse. Increased funding alone won't deliver better outcomes if those aren't addressed. Over the past 10 years, we've made 137 recommendations to help address these challenges. Since I testified before HASC last year and highlighted 52 open Navy shipbuilding recommendations, I have been encouraged to see the Navy taking steps to implement more of them. We're also seeing progress at the Coast Guard. For example, efforts to reduce design construction risk in the Waterways Cutter program have been commendable. That said, significant challenges remain. Let me focus on just 2 areas where change is needed: ship design practices and industrial base investments. First, ship design. Improving ship design practices is one step that could help drive different outcomes on shipbuilding programs. As I have testified in the past, both Navy and Coast Guard continue to move into construction before designs are sufficiently mature. That's a consistent pattern, and it leads to predictable results: cost overruns, schedule delays, and performance issues. The frigate and OPC programs provide just the latest examples of these outcomes. The Maritime Action Plan also emphasizes the risks of starting construction too early, and the proposed SHIPS Act encourages the use of commercial best practices for design. If the services want different outcomes, design practices must change. That means aligning key decisions with design maturity and adopting more modern approaches. Globally, commercial shipbuilders are delivering ships on shorter, more predictable timelines. They're doing that in part by using advanced digital tools and integrated design processes. We see similar opportunities for the Navy and the Coast Guard. Investments in technologies like digital twins, which are virtual models which mirror the condition and performance of ships, could improve not just the design process, but testing, production, and sustainment as well. Second, the industrial base. There's broad agreement that without a stronger industrial base, shipbuilding goals simply won't be achievable. Trades workforce shortages, supplier constraints, and shipyard capacity all remain significant barriers. The Navy has already received more than $10 billion to address some of these issues. I recently visited Electric Boat and saw some of these investments at work, and my team spoke with workers about some of the efforts to improve their working conditions. While there are no doubt some promising examples from these investments, what's missing is a fully strategic and coordinated approach. Our recent work on the submarine industrial base investments found that the Navy hasn't defined the scope of what's needed, how much investment it will take, how long it will take, and what a healthy industrial base actually looks like to meet our needs. Without that, decision makers don't have a clear picture of how long we will need to keep investing billions in our industrial base concerns or when we can expect to see results. We're making a related recommendation as a part of this testimony today. We have also previously reported that the Coast Guard lacks a long-term strategic plan to meet its fleet modernization goals. This becomes even more important now as the Coast Guard has moved out quickly to get ships on contract to guide its investments. Let me close with this. While our recommendations offer some fixes, there is no one panacea for our shipbuilding woes. The scale of change required is significant, and it will take sustained, coordinated effort across the government. The current moment, with historic funding and focus, offers a real chance for meaningful progress. If that opportunity isn't matched with disciplined execution and strategic alignment, we could fall short of our goals and waste billions. Your actions to work together as committees to elevate these issues is a really positive step. Increased coordination across the agencies you oversee will be just as critical to ensure we are on the right course for the long journey toward revitalizing U.S. shipbuilding. Thank you for the time, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank y'all so much for being here. And I can't be 3 places at once, and I'm supposed to be. So, but this is the priority for me. So with that, I'm going to submit my questions for the record and would ask that y'all reply to them. And with that, I'm going to yield to Mr. Courtney for 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Trent. So again, it's something that this committee really looks forward to in terms of your presence here today. Both offices are so important in terms of giving us, a fresh look at an issue that, as we've heard over and over today, has really just risen really to the top of, priority for the Armed Services Committee as well as the Appropriations Committee. I appreciate the fact that, Mr. Labs, you did acknowledge the tonnage increase, which is, I think, actually a pretty steep increase in terms of, what the output is. I mean, if you look at Cold War era levels, I mean, we really are basically on par, in terms of at least tonnage. The wage improvement money resulted in 2 big labor contracts for the Metal Trades Council up in Groton. Again, about a 40% increase over time, really creating separation with the rest of the labor market. And they're definitely seeing, a lot more response. A week ago Saturday, they had a hiring fair where they were expecting about 400 people to show up. 1,800 showed up. They actually made 900 offers for people who are actually skilled up and ready to start work. I mean, they're attracting people who are already, certified in the trades now to come in the door. And again, it's connected to the wage improvement. There's no question about that. The Columbia program, again, you mentioned, the build rate going back to November. In February, Admiral Weeks announced that the delivery of District of Columbia is now being moved from 2029 to 2028. They've had an acceleration plan now where all modulars are in the building, finally. The bow module came up from Huntington Ingalls, 60% complete. They just made a decision, just get it in the building. And workers from Huntington Ingalls came up with it, and they've actually now are really moving towards pressure hull complete this calendar year, hopefully getting it in the water. They need to get it into the water in 2027 to hit that 28 delivery date. 3 shifts are now working. The third shift was actually just kind of a skeletal crew, and now, again, it's around the clock, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So, again, a lot of this is anecdotal, and I completely agree with Ms. Oakley that, given the amount of money that's being invested into the industrial base, we need to see a better dashboard in terms of just how it's all sort of unfolding. But there's, in my opinion, I'm pretty close to this place. Admiral Caudle and I were walked through the Columbia site about 10 days ago. There's just a different sort of approach, urgency, that really didn't exist. And as I said, I've been around long enough to sort of see that. So one question I wanted to ask, at least, issue to explore is the question of design before building, which I think is something that, hopefully people have gotten through their heads. The battleship that's been proposed in terms of what's showing up in the skinny budget in both year 1 and the fit up shows a lot of money going into that project where there is no design that exists as of today. So we're hearing that there's going to be AI-enabled digital twins to help accelerate the design process. But again, just, if there's AI can help, let's go for it. But the bottom line is that we really need to have, I think, some more guardrails about the fact that we do not start cutting steel until we have a design that is, I mean, hopefully well over 50% complete. And maybe you can just comment on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's this mistaken notion that getting started fast is going to get you a ship any faster. And while there are things to be said about being able to get things on the books and get things underway, I think what gets lost in that mix is the work necessary to be able to understand what it is that you're building and whether if it's executable within the resources that you have and to meet the requirements that you have, right? And so I think that early design work that we would like to see is key to being able to understand what even the art of the possible is for something like Battleship, for example. So the companies that we go and go out and meet with, commercial shipbuilding companies and other companies, they have a mantra that is a little different of go slow at first to go fast in the end, right? And so that important early design work helps you kind of suss out what it is you can and can't do. So while AI and digital tools, and I talk a lot about them because I see them as vital tools to be able to progress and speed through some iterations of design, they're just a tool, right? They can't help you fix a business case that does not close. And so that work needs to be done up front to be able to understand what it is we're going to do before we start letting contracts for construction and authorizing construction to begin and bending steel. So I think it's really important just to you know, sometimes the things that we say at GAO get taken in a very siloed and narrow manner, and we don't mean to imply that, you know, one tool is the solution to everything. It's just an option to help builders move more quickly once they understand the design and once they move through that process.
I appreciate that. Eric, you commented on it, but I know I'm over my time. We'll submit a question for the record.
Thank you, Mr. Courtney. I now recognize Mr. Carbajal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Oakley, strengthening the U.S. shipbuilding industrial base requires sustained demand across both commercial and government sectors, which is why the SHIPS Act is so critical. How would enactment of the SHIPS Act help generate the kind of consistent commercial demand needed to stabilize and grow the industrial base that government shipbuilding relies on?
Yeah, I think there's no doubt that having a thriving commercial shipbuilding industry in the United States would be beneficial to our military shipbuilding endeavors, absolutely. I think the thing about it is that we can't kind of ignore is trying to create that from basically nothing at this point, at the same time that we're trying to revitalize our military shipbuilding industrial base, is not an easy feat. It's going to cost a lot of money, and it's going to require sustained commitment. And so you might imagine that anything that happens that you all are able to pass and move through needs to be committed to for the long term, because it's a long-term problem to be solved.
In that regard, how do you see the SHIPS Act complementing the administration's Maritime Action Plan in achieving a more sustainable whole-of-industry approach to rebuilding U.S. shipbuilding?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously they're very complementary. We haven't done a complete analysis, but they complement each other significantly. And I will also mention that they do align in a number of ways with recommendations that my team has made on military shipbuilding, but also our colleagues that cover commercial shipbuilding have made similar recommendations related to cargo preference and mariner training and facilities in that regard. And so there's a number of things that we've pointed out as well that are very important. I think the thing that I mentioned in my opening statement about having like a coordinated strategic approach is super important in this regard, because we don't want to get in the business of robbing Peter to pay Paul in any way, shape, or form. And right now we have the Navy making the bulk of the investments into the industrial base at this point for its purposes, obviously. But we don't want that to disadvantage the other shipbuilding industrial base, including the Coast Guard and the commercial shipbuilding industrial base that we're trying to build up. That's why it's so important for those efforts to be highly coordinated across those entities.
Thank you. Dr. Labs, you discuss in your testimony the potential effects that the administration's Golden Fleet project for the Navy could have on the industry. In some, it would ease the burden in some sectors, but increase it in others. Even though the Navy's projects significantly outpace the Coast Guard's by sheer number of vessels, can the Coast Guard shipbuilding projects have a net positive impact on the industry? And if so, what is the path for the service to make that a reality?
I would say yes, the Coast Guard's project can have a positive effect on the industry because a lot of the Coast Guard vessels, when they have purchased them, would tend to go to yards that do not build Navy ships. That isn't 100% true, but that has been largely true, over the past, 20 to 30 years or so. The extent that the Coast Guard can sort of have a positive effect on industry, they should continue to do things like what they have been doing most recently, which is sort of they have outsourced some of their work to the Finns in terms of the Arctic Security Cutter, but also then distributing their work amongst shipyards that are currently not doing a lot of Navy work, but also following the practices and recommendations that the GAO has identified by also making sure their designs are set, that they are engaging in sort of the best practices for the commercial shipbuilding industry, engaging in as much of the new technology and modernization for the shipyards that they place their business with as much as possible.
Thank you. Dr. Labs, you noted in your testimony the long-term contracts can help provide stability in the work to bolster shipyards. In general, is either block buy authority or multi-year procurement authority better?
I would say that either have positive benefits in the sense that they provide the long-term stability that shipbuilders are looking for. One of the things when I go out to visit shipyards is that they stress over and over again that what they want is a consistent, steady demand signal, which allows them to sort of plan, to then tool up, size their workforce correctly, and really sort of get things humming, get those learning curves down, and getting ships out faster than they do when they first start out. Block buy has the advantages of being something that can be done relatively easily compared to multi-year procurement, but multi-year procurement has more legislative authorities into it that allows that has more, if you will, sort of more rigor behind it. It's a stronger enforcement mechanism on discipline upon the part of the services and the government to provide that steady demand signal. But both do that job.
Thank you. I'm out of time, Mr. Chairman. I have one more question. I'll just submit it for the record.
Thank you, Mr. Carbajal. I now recognize Ms. Elfreth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm the new kid here, so I'll be brief, I promise. Ms. Oakley, my fiance is a GAO alum, and so I'm particularly partial to your incredible work, and I too am so grateful for your objective feedback here, especially as we move into markup. I want to follow up on the question I had asked the previous panel around, trying our best to get to 95% of predictability for spare parts, but I'm going to quote Mark Twain here and say there's lies, damn lies, in statistics, because if the 5% we get wrong happen to be that one part that takes 6 to 18 months to produce, even if we still produce it in this country, we are SOL. So can you give me a little more perspective from GAO on how to solve that spare parts problem?
Yeah, I think that the spare parts issue are a real challenge, both in the build side and in the maintenance and repair side. And in the maintenance and repair side, I think we're seeing a little bit more of a move toward using technology to be able to address some of those challenges. So some of the things that, for example, the submarine industrial base investments have made happen are through advanced manufacturing techniques that can focus on some of those parts, for example, that are the long lead ones that we need, that are the bottlenecks. And I know they've been doing a lot of work to try and identify what those parts are, but there's a long way to go to get to qualified, certified parts that sailors and builders are comfortable incorporating. But again, like you were asking, ensuring that you have the right data and the right parts information is key to being able to even use those types of technologies. And I think that the Navy does have some work to do in that regard.
Well, thoughts on like a most wanted list of the parts that are most frequently broken and the hardest to track down eventually, or how are we getting a little creative with tackle? This can't be an impossible challenge.
Yeah, I mean, I think what they've been relying on, frankly, in the additive manufacturing space is, hearing from the builders, for example, or from the repair yards, like what are those things that are the holdups, and if they can't obtain the intellectual property, reverse engineering those parts to be able to then additively manufacture and print them. And I think that there is push, especially on the part of, the Maritime Industrial Base Office, which is now the Submarine Industrial Base Office, to really get to a point where they can have those things on demand, those key critical parts. But it really takes a strong understanding of your supply chain, which has been a challenge for the Navy.
Absolutely. Dr. Labs, I'll open this next question to both of you. Appreciating there is no magic wand, there is no silver bullet here. We talk a lot about what's wrong with our industrial base. I'd like to talk about what other countries are doing far better. If you were in our shoes and you were heading into markup next month, what is something you would submit for the committee to consider that other countries are doing better than us and we should dig into?
That's a great question, and I'm trying to think of what some appropriate answers would be. One of the things that the United States did when it was building the Spruance-class destroyer program, it built an entirely new shipyard for that. And it did so with the most modern technology it could, with, it was for what was 1970s a digital shipyard. What the Japanese and the Koreans, and obviously the Chinese have done as well, is they have built very modern shipyards with as much automation as they possibly can. For us to go down that path, though, of course, would be a very expensive process and require a lot of government backing to do that. And even so, for naval shipbuilding, it's going to have its limitations, because one of the things that automation does for you is that when you're building sort of large kind of open boxes, you can do a lot of automated welding and so forth. And our current yards are working on that. But to do that sort of kind of a greenfield startup that can incorporate the most modern techniques would be certainly something that we can learn from the Japanese and the Koreans. One of the other things that I think we need to do is focus on the labor issue in the United States. And we've made a lot of progress, I think, over the last couple of years. But the skilled labor forces that we need in the United States to be able to execute these programs and introducing the whole commercial sector into that, one of the things that I'm most concerned about that is that it's going to increase the demand for that skilled labor, and that's going to make it more competitive for those yards to be able to do that kind of work. So there's not a very good answer for you, but at least it's sort of the answer that I've got at the moment.
I would say a couple of things. First off, I agree with the workforce. I mean, valuing the trades workforce in this country is something that we need to figure out how to show, essentially, and the investments that we're making through the Navy's funds to be able to invest in workforce programs and wage increases and that kind of thing, I think are beginning to show that, but it's certainly something that we could think about. The other thing that I would think about is just our approach in general to shipbuilding is a little bit different in terms of we try to design these ships that are the be-all and end-all to everything versus designing ships that meet kind of like that minimum viable capability that we need that then can be iterated on and capability can be added to. And that then provides not just a consistent and continual demand signal for building yards because they know that you're going to keep iterating on those ships, but it also gets you out of the habit of designing a new ship class every time you need a new capability. And so I think that's one area that we could focus on.
Thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Chair. I yield.
Wow. I thank all the members for coming. I thank all the guests for being interested enough to hear this. Ms. Oakley, you almost sound like me up there. I'm not that smart. You're a much smarter version of me. I really thank you, witnesses, for being here and what you do. So with that, the hearing is adjourned.